Hey guys, what do you know, that head cleaner actually works, so I am now back to the JVC GRD270U video camera. And I'm also back working on the Admiral TV project. I dug through the SAMs that I had picked up at the old TV radio lab a few months ago. I didn't get a whole lot of SAMs, but luckily I did have the one for this set. Chassis 20X1. So I now have a decent schematic and parts list and voltage chart and all that good stuff. I showed you the schematic before, but this has a lot more detail. So I went through and did some more checking. Some of the resistors are off a little bit, but not too far. So what I did was I went ahead and replaced this 6SN7, even though it was testing okay. And the set's working a little bit better. Still only have about 5,500 volts, but even that is enough of a boost to give me a noticeably better picture. So that's with the brightness all the way up. So still not so great. It really should be closer to 9,000 volts. But it's been playing for a while now. Everything seems very stable. Getting good reception. So I will keep checking. And I'm also going to go ahead and replace that focus control and those two power resistors. I want to do that regardless. And I'm sure I'll be able to figure out what else is wrong with this set eventually. I got a question recently about the radio you sometimes hear in the background of my videos. Well, that's usually one of my vintage radios that I kind of rotate. Currently I'm using the Philco Hippo radio that I repainted white. It's one of my better performing radios. I like to listen to these while I work on stuff. Now, back to this. So, I want to put this control salvage from another set in here and get this guy out of here. First thing I'm going to do is clean up all these lugs. So there's the power switch. This next section, 3 terminals, is the volume control. And this is the focus control. So here's the one he's got in here. And this isn't used at all. That's where this big fat focus control is going to go. And then the others are wired up just like the original. So you see these 2 stubs of red wire. Well, those are these 2 red wires. And see these 2 new capacitors? You know, it's the same as these 2 old capacitors. So it should be pretty easy to do, at least for the back 2 sections. Just transfer these wires from here to here. Now for the focus, this wire has been spliced and rerouted. You trace it through and it went up to here, so I will just undo this and this wire will then go over here. Let's see where the others go. This yellow wire here going down here goes right over to this tie point. So I may have to run a wire from here back up to this point. I gotta investigate that further. And the other wire, this white guy, also goes right to a tie point back here. So again, I may have to run a wire up to the front. These resistors feed right into the focus control. They're on a schematic. Oh, somewhere. There, it's up on the SAM schematic. Right here. Much easier to see on this one. So 750, 750. Go to the wiper on the focus control. I guess there were some variations where they used 1 power resistor instead of 2, and this had a slightly different value. So I'm going to measure mine, and if I have 1350 on the focus, I'm going to use the 2 750s. So that's what's going to replace these 3 guys. So I think it'll be a nice, much neater job. I think I'm also going to replace these electrolytics while I'm at it, assuming I've got some 470s or whatever these are supposed to be on hand. don't think this is, I think I can do a little bit neater job than these. Plus these are a bit old. I'm not sure what the date code is on these. But since I've got it out, I might as well replace them. And then of course back to this horizontal section. So I've been checking these resistors, and so far I have not found a smoking gun. So I'm hoping maybe it'll just be an incremental improvement kind of thing. So how do I go about cleaning out these old terminals? Well, first thing I like to do is use a solder sucker. This is a p2o3 that I found in a little TV radio lab a few months back. You pump it, push the yellow button, suck solder into this Teflon tip. Teflon so it won't melt. So, cock it again. My soldering iron, it's a Weller WES51. I've got it cranked up almost 100% on the heat. It's about 65 watts, I think. I have been using a conical tip, but I recently switched to a spade bit. And this does do a much better job of transferring heat to these big old connections. So I was glad I made that switch. So heat up the terminal, get the solder flowing, bring this guy over, suck it out. That'll get like 90% of the solder out of there. For the last 10%, I switch over to solder wick. I know technically it's solder, S-O-L-D-E-R, but check this out. S-O-D-E-R, this is solder wick. I guess that's kind of the butchered American pronunciation, solder, but I guess technically it should be solder. So I put this up against the joint, put the soldering iron against that, heats up the copper, and more importantly the rosin and various chemicals impregnated in this copper, and it sucks off the last bits of solder. Now get this off, a little bit of wire here. I got some small cutters. I'll cut this off as best I can without damaging the old connector. Another technique is to use a flat bladed screwdriver, a small one, if you can get it in there, and work it in and pry up the old wires. Can I try to get them out? Or take a small pair of needle nose and just start working this. Once most of the solder is gone, the joint should start to pry pretty easily. Alright, so there's one bit of it. And this guy's being stubborn, but almost got free. There's a little more heat and that should just fall right out. Come on, there we go. Alright. One cleaned up connection. Just gotta do that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 more times. And there we go. As a final touch, I used a Q-tip and some mineral spirits to clean off the old solder flux. So now I'm going to carefully remove the wires from this guy and put them onto here. I finished installing the control, including running a couple wires back to here. And I also replaced the nasty old power resistors. Got one new one here and another one over here. Here's the old ones. And here's the controls I removed. And I also did find that 47 ohm grid resistor on the horizontal output tube was measuring about 58 ohms, so I replaced that as well. Hopefully that will make a difference. Now what I think I'll do is test the picture tube. I've hooked up the 10BP4 to my Sencor CR70. Have the filament set for 6.3 volts. Don't expect there to be any shorts since I've been operating the set. Cut off. That's odd. I'm rotating this cutoff control and that needle's supposed to be moving, but it's not. Try a bias range. Yeah, there we go. But it's supposed to be a negative 52. I dropped it down to negative 36, which means there's less of a negative bias on the grid, meaning the tube will conduct more, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. But at least I can get this needle to move up, sort of. It's supposed to be inside that black box. And then emissions. Well, the test okay, but again, that bias is wrong if I put it back where it's supposed to be. The emissions are still good if I crank this up to 100%, but not if I drop it down. Yeah, keep it cranked up for now. And the life test. Pretty crappy. Alright, so this tube isn't so hot. I'll let it run for a while, see if things improve any, and then maybe I'll try the rejuvenation feature. I let the picture tube run for a while, but the readings really didn't change, so I tried the rejuvenate and auto restore features, and that helped the emissions a little bit, but not the cutoff. So I'd like to try using this, which is an RCA 10BP4 that I got off of eBay a while back, which tests pretty good. But before I can do that, I've got to get this one out of the chassis. It took more work than I would have liked, but I did finally get the picture tube out of this chassis. I had to chip away at the glue using a combination of a utility knife and some files. But then I also discovered that the socket was not only just glued on with a lot of sloppy glue, but it was cocked and off center. So kind of shallow on this side, but sticking out on the left side. So I had to actually file down quite a bit of this black Bakelite socket. And then the final trick was to smear some Vaseline on this, because it was getting hung up on this yoke, and I really hope I did not damage this yoke when I got it out. But I don't think I did, because there's kind of a clear plastic coating on the inside here, and I think that protected it. Now with that out of the way, I can really clean up this chassis, which is a lot worse than I had realized at first. I got quite a bit of the rust off in this area, and on this corner, and down in here, but there's still a lot of patches in here too. So because it's so rusty, there's no way I'm going to get this pristine, but again, I'm hoping to just remove most of the worst of the rust, and then I'll put primer on this. I just want to keep it from coming back or getting worse. With this out of the way, I can also get at some of this other stuff we couldn't see before, like this replacement cap. It's General Electric. Service design alumalytic capacitor. And what I thought was neat was the way they had the range on here. Generally these caps were rated for like plus 100%, minus 20% or thereabouts. So on here they actually stated the range. So for example, this has 4 sections. One section is 15 to 20, then 88 to 160, 27 to 50, and 22 to 50. And the voltage ratings are on the side over here. 450, 250, 75, and 50. So I'm not quite sure what the Admiral spec'd out. I'd have to look that up, but since this seems to be working, and same with this guy, I'm just going to leave him alone. Slowly but surely I'm tackling the rust on this chassis. At first I was using naval jelly, then I switched over to this Rust-Oleum rust stripper, which is a bit stronger. But this is more liquid than a gel, so you really can do it on horizontal surfaces. And this does a really good job on these deeply pitted areas. My problem is I find that after I wipe this off and expose the bare metal to air again, it forms a light patina of rust almost immediately. Also, because this is so heavily rusted, once the rust is gone, the metal is really deeply pitted. You can see in these areas. So what I've been doing is painting it with a primer. I did the same thing on my Philco 60 chassis. It just looks really crappy after you remove the rust, and I don't want this rust to come back, so I really think painting is the way to go. Alternately, what I've done in the past is I put WD-40 on it, give it a light coating of oil to keep the rust from coming back, but I think this will work out better. So once I get the rust off and I get it to this point, give it a light sanding with like 320 or 220 grit sandpaper, and clean it off really good with a damp rag, and then as soon as possible get this primer on it. This is a rusty metal primer, binds really well and prevents rust from coming back. Once this is a bit drier, I'll give it a light sanding, and then I will put on this aluminum paint, which looks quite good. Again, it's what I used on my Philco 60, and looks quite a bit like a cadmium plated steel does. Slowly but surely I've been making progress on this chassis. After the primer dried in this front section, I applied the aluminum paint. So here's what that ends up looking like. Kind of like a poor man's chrome. I then moved back and unmounted the bracket that holds on the yoke and focus coil, and found a really heavy patch of rust down in here, so I've been working on that area. I also unmounted the IF deck. This is a video and sound IF in here, and found that there was quite a bit of rust hiding in between the chassis and this. So I've been working on this area here and down in here. Once this middle section's done, in the back will go pretty fast. It's not as rusty back here, just kind of some light surface rust. Well, I'm going to end off this video here, and I will pick up hopefully when all this rust is removed.